Hello and welcome to the Deep Learning and AI Ethics course. My name is Scott Hawley, and this first video, we're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about why this course, why me, and why you. So you may wonder, why is it Deep Learning and AI Ethics all in one course instead of two? And the simple reason is because I only get to teach an advanced class every 2 years. And these are two very important topics that a lot of trends in education research are showing that putting ethics and AI instruction together can have some really good outcomes. Why just deep learning and not other types of machine learning? Well, that was by request of the data science program, and deep learning is what I know best among the variety of machine learning methods that are available. And why is it an upper level course as opposed to, say, an intro course? This was also by request of a few different departments. And also a couple of years ago, I taught a general education level machine learning and ethics course and learned a few things from there. So we're having some prereqs this time around. And also, you may say, well, why should I even take this course at Belmont? There are plenty of machine learning courses out there, deep learning instruction available on the internet through various websites. And of course, if you're a Belmont student, you get college credit for it. Also, unlike the online courses, you get a human being to talk to and all of that. And I know a lot of different resources out there that we're going to be using and synthesizing together for this course. And as an instructor, I tend to be pretty well at breaking things down and connecting things and explaining them to non-experts. So I think you'll get something out of that. That was why the course. Why me? Why is a physics professor teaching this course, right? So my background is in numerical modeling, just not machine learning. I did a lot of numerical astrophysics and numerical relativity and supercomputing. And an awful lot of that carries over because it involves optimization problems and root finding and function approximation. And that's what deep learning is all about, is fitting curves to things. So my side interest in music is what got me to Belmont in the first place. But over time, I switched towards teaching audio engineering students. The reason I'm telling you my story is to try to answer this question of why are you taking this course from a physics professor? So in the context of audio engineering, I went to my first Audio Engineering Society conference, AES conference, back in 2013, and there was a company there called Acusonus that were showing off a machine learning based app for drum mic separation, what we call source separation. And I was blown away. And that was using a method that's related to neural networks and deep learning. It's not quite exactly the same thing, but it's very close in a lot of ways. And so I started studying it because I realized this was going to affect my audio engineering students' lives in a profound way in the future. And then a little after that was when deep learning was making lots of headlines. And I finally, as I do with plenty of things, kind of decided, you know what? I need to learn this. I'm trying to move this little picture of me somewhere else. Yeah, this is my website, by the way, and I'm on Twitter and GitHub with that handle there. So in the context of learning around 2015, 2016, I got hooked. I got really hooked on deep learning and writing tutorials and beginning to write my own applications and research, particularly for audio. And then as far as the ethics side of things, there was a time around the summer of 2017, I've been working on a project called Signal Train that subsequently got published, and I was stuck modeling audio compressors. There are these nonlinear audio signal processing effects that lots of audio engineers use, and they were hard. And it turned out that that summer, there was an opportunity to be part of a grant program, a 2-year program run out of Oxford on an interdisciplinary study of science and Christianity and history and philosophy and integrating all these things. And this was when AI ethics was just kind of entering onto a lot of people's radar. And so I thought, well, there's a lot of technical expertise on machine learning for my signal processing thing I was stuck on. And so if I could somehow come up with a way to get on that grant program and get to Oxford, then maybe I could get some technical help. And so with the help of some people here at Belmont, notably Andy Watts in theology, came up with a project for Christian ethics of AI and what would that look like and what would be some ways to think about that, and ended up getting on the grant. And in the process of preparing all of my work for that over the next 2 years and subsequently since then, I got really hooked on the ethics side of things as well and did pretty well. So we'll just fast forward to why should you have any trust that you could take this course from me and that you could expect to learn anything. And so this is not for the purposes of blowing my own horn. It's really just to give you some idea that I'm well familiar with the topics that we're going to be learning about in this course, and have been measured and tested and found competent by the international community. So since I started getting back into research, written a bunch of papers, published either on signal processing and deep learning or on AI ethics. Last year, we had this article from Acoustical Society of America on musical instrument sounds and physics modeling or machine learning, and that was the most popular article. I've won a few contests for either apps or like for writing and communicating some of these topics, and collaborated with companies on products for things. I maintain a lot of relationships with experts and groups in tech and the topics that we're going to be talking about. And I get asked to speak and do interviews and consult various times about things, or do some writing or organizing conference sessions on machine learning and audio. I've also taken a lot of courses myself. In fact, the reason we're doing this as an online course, partly because of COVID and partly because I'm just really familiar with the online course format for deep learning and machine learning or AI ethics or philosophy of technology. And yeah, this is pretty much all I do anymore. I used to be mainly a musician in my off time, and now I'm mostly a machine learning, deep learning person in my off time. And if you want, you can check out my blog that's about some of the things we're going to be learning in this course. Just a note, I've never actually presented at a top level deep learning conference, things like NeurIPS or ICLR. This is where people that are upstream and higher up in the research world are very active. And I stay more in the application domain towards audio and connections with philosophy and theology and other fields as well. So why you? Why are you in this course? Well, I suspect we'll hear from a lot of different people about that, but you probably are aware of the importance of deep learning and machine learning and AI ethics and their impact on the world that you live in and that you're going to be working in or already are working in. You're curious about what this is and whether you could use it for something. And you have an interest in at least a couple of the topics that we're going to be intersecting with, because every field in academia and business, society is being impacted by automation and by machine learning, and in many cases by deep learning as well. So the stuff that we talk about here is broadly applicable to a lot of different areas. And so we're going to be drawing examples from different fields as we go. You're not expected to be a coding expert, but you are expected to at least be okay with seeing a little Python. So I'm going to be still kind of teaching you things as we go and have some lessons and exercises for you just to flex your Python muscles as we use that as an application for deep learning. So you've seen at least a little of it before. I'm not expecting you to code an entire giant model from scratch. We'll walk you through it. You may have an interest in the entrepreneurial side of things, and we'll talk about that some as well. And you want to contribute to the world we live in to make it a better place for human beings of all levels of society, and to limit as best as possible the negative effects of things like automation, help preserve privacy, avoid exploiting other people. So we'll be talking about these things. And it all came at once. You have an interest in, the history of human thought. We're going to talk about some of the philosophy behind some of this, and how modern AI systems arose, and how automated systems are similar to and sometimes different to how humans do things, and where those intersections are. And you want to learn how to use deep learning and how deep learning systems work and why, and also how to teach yourself, because the field is going to keep on evolving. And some of the things that we talk about in this course are going to stay true regardless, but the field advances so quickly that maybe 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years after we take this course, probably some big, new, important, game-changing thing will come out. And so how can you learn to stay up on that? We'll talk about that as well. And I've prepared some other resources that we'll talk about a little more later on. The question of, do you need deep learning for your business or your medicine or your art or your science use case, whatever application you're interested in? There are plenty of other modeling techniques out there that are available, and that people in your business or in your healthcare network may already be familiar with, that can generate serviceable results, certainly. And yet what we've been seeing time and again is that the deep learning approaches end up beating out other methods in a lot of ways. And I think it's an important thing to add to your toolbox. So the next thing that we'll talk about in another video is how this course is going to be structured. And some of this course is going to be available kind of as a draft version for people out there on the internet, and some of the aspects of the course are going to be only for registered Belmont students. So we'll talk about that. I got one other thing. Just as I was working on this today, Jeremy Howard, who is a deep learning expert and an education expert, he runs the Fast AI series of courses that I've benefited a lot from. He has just posted his own video on my journey to deep learning. And it's about an hour. But if you are interested in the history of AI and how one person kind of came to it, this is an excellent video. You can watch it on a fast speed, like I watched it on 1.75 speed, so it goes by a little faster. Jeremy has worked in healthcare. He's done startup companies and businesses, and he's taught, and he's published research papers, and he's somebody that is upstream of me as far as a lot of these topics. I really recommend it, especially those of you in business. So you can either use that link or use a video there, or I can post a link. So till next time, thanks for tuning in.